Hey everyone, in this lecture I'm going to go over how to use the waterfall structure for a hypothetical restaurant startup. Now you can adapt this waterfall framework for pretty much any business as long as you have a grasp of the cash flows. So let me show you what it would look like. Alright, now what you're looking at on the screen here is the sample project worksheet that is provided for in the waterfall model that you have. All right, now all I did was made some adjustments here. Okay, so I'm gonna assume that this is for a startup restaurant that has a certain startup cost, $500,000, and this is just gonna be cash flow. I'm taking out all debt. So basically, I just modified what we had in the original model to some economics that would reflect, say, a restaurant startup. Okay, so let's take a what that would look like and how you would go about doing something like that. Now remember, all of the waterfall structures or the worksheets, they all flow from the cash flow line that was on row 26. So at the end of the day, the only thing that feeds into those calculations is going to be this row. Whatever you put above it, or however you want to add to it, it won't affect that. As long as you change this row, then it would change all of the calculations on the back. So basically, you can create any kind of business here, up here. It could be a restaurant startup, it could be a yoga studio, it could be a laundromat, it could be a food truck. Whatever it is that you're starting, you need to be able to create the business model pro forma here, right? Because every business can be different. I'm not going to be able to go through every hypothetical small business. So but you'll get the idea once we go through this example. All right, so let's start with sales. Every small business startup that you're going to do, you're going to have some sales assumptions. Okay, so for this restaurant, what I'm assuming here is that in the first year it's going to do $650,000 in sales. It's kind of its first year. It takes a while for the community to know of its existence. It might take a while for the Yelpers to find it. You know, first year is kind of a learning year for a new restaurant. So I'm going to assume that it's going to take a year. It's going to get to the second year before it really starts to get its footing. And then afterwards, what I'm assuming after the second year is that every year afterwards, its sales is going to stable and grow at about 3% a year. Okay, just to keep up with the cost of goods and inflation as it goes up. Now, for a restaurant, restaurants often run promotions and sometimes they might have refunds. Okay, so what I'm going to assume here for the promotions is that it spends about 5% of its budget every year and running promotions. It could be coupons, it could be, you know, buy something get something half off kind of deal. It could be restaurant week, whatever promotions it's running, where it's taking some kind of a discount off of its menu pricing. All right, so that's what this line is. And then I'm going to assume that there's going to be some customers that they're going to get that are not going to be happy with either the service or the food or both, and that in order to avoid a negative review on Yelp, they're going to give some refund. Okay, so I'm going to assume at about 3% of its annual revenues will go towards refunds. Okay. Now, once we factor all that in, what we end up having here is a net revenue. So this is revenue after promotions and refunds. Okay. Now, after that, we're going to have costs for running a business, right? Especially a restaurant. You're going to need waiters, you're going to need cooks, you're going to need different kinds of labor. They're going to have different hours, maybe a general manager who's going to be managing everybody, doing all of the scheduling, doing all of the training might get paid more. There's going to be benefits. So I'm kind of lumping them all in right now. For you as a business owner, if you want a more accurate projection, you need to break down these cost items into smaller line items. So labor, you might break it down between salaried labor and hourly labor. You might break it down between managerial and non-managerial labor, whereas maybe managerial labor might be a significantly higher hourly rate than the minimum wage, whereas the hourly associates are going to get something like minimum wage or a little bit more than that, right? But if you have different tiers of employees or associates at different levels of wages, you want to break those down if you want a more accurate projection. Same thing for all the other categories, but I'm just going to do kind of lumped up numbers here so that you get the gist of this example. So also for a restaurant, there's going to be food costs or food related costs, right? When you serve a plate to somebody, there's the actual food that's on there, but there's also potentially, if you're doing to go, or if you're kind of more of a to go place, you have packaging, you have you may even have to go utensils, you have sauce, you have things that are related to delivering that one plate that somebody ordered. Okay, you got condiments as well. So all of those can get rolled up into food costs, things that are directly related to the ordering of a food. Okay. Now I'm thinking of a kind of a fast food, sort of like borderline fast food, fast casual type of a place, so that their cost of goods, food, is not that high. So if you're kind of in the industry, fast casual will range anywhere from 28 to 35% in terms of food costs. But if it's like fast food, it can go down to the low 20s potentially, depending on what you're serving. I'm going to assume this is kind of more of like fast food, but the first year they're not very good yet. They might have a lot of waste, for instance. They're not utilizing all of their goods. They don't know how to store it properly, so they're actually losing some food costs to spoilage. And so the first year, instead of 25% food cost rate, they're at 30% because they're still kind of learning how to be efficient and with their food costs. Okay, and the same thing with labor. It's not going to be, they're not going to be as effective the first year. They're going to be over hiring because in the first year you rather be over deployed in terms of having people working in your restaurant than not having enough people. Then if you have a long line there, people have a bad experience, they never come back, right? So it's what a lot of new restaurants do is initially they kind of overstaff just to make sure that they don't give a bad experience, and then they start to pare down, and they pare down just enough so that the customers can't perceive the difference, but then the restaurant starts to save because sometimes you get to know when your peak hours are going to be, and then after that you know how to adjust your hours accordingly. So we're going to assume that the second year they become more efficient. They're going to go from 45% labor costs to 35% labor costs. Okay, utilities and rent and utility, those don't change very much. So utilities maybe goes up a little bit. If your sales go up, you have to use a little bit more fire or electricity depending on what kind of equipment you're using, or if you're turning on the heat or the AC more. But otherwise, rent is rent. Whether your restaurant is full or not, you're paying the same amount of rent. Okay. So for the rent and utilities, we're going to assume that it's just going to grow 3% a year afterwards. Okay, and then there's other expenses. So other expenses to capture everything else. You may have marketing expenses. You may have like uniforms, trainings, and insurance, other things. Okay, so this one I'm going to assume 7% of the sales each year will go towards all other expenses. Okay. All right, next what we have is, this is not net revenue anymore. Let's call it gross profit, okay? And then we have sales proceeds, and let's assume that they're not depreciating anything right now. So we're going to assume that what we have here is going to be the cash flow. Not the best assumption here. What we normally have is if you're investing $500,000 into the startup costs, some of it's going to go towards equipment and will be depreciated. So those, right now, I'm going to assume that depreciation is lumped up in these expenses. Okay, so this gross profit here becomes the actual cash flow. All right, and then what I did here for row 26 is just to make this cash flow equal to that calculated cash flow. So $500,000 startup costs. Okay, this could be to secure the lease, to do the build out and fixtures, and buy out the old equipment from the restaurant that failed beforehand, get it for pennies for the dollar, and then start making some money from the sales of the restaurant. So based on our assumptions, first year, over deploying labor, wasting food, okay, not marketing very well, and still kind of ramping up business. First year, they're going to operate at a loss, and a lot of restaurants do that in the first year. It takes time to really build up their sales, but we're assuming that this restaurant is going to really find its footing in the second and third years, and then kind of stabilized at making a little over 100 grand in profits every year. Now, this profit that is cash that is distributable, this is after everything, this is what we're calling distributable cash flow, is what's going to flow into your waterfall framework. Okay, so you don't want to just put profit into the waterfall framework. That's perfect for the tax purposes. But if you want to know what's actually going to go in the pocket for all of the members involved, you want to look at distributable cash. And distributable cash is not always the same as net profits. Okay, because for instance, depreciation is something that knocks on the profits and will lower your taxable profits, but it's not a cash event, so it actually doesn't do anything to your cash. You still have the cash to be able to distribute. Okay, so you want to use the distributable cash flows to feed into the waterfall frameworks. All right, so what we just did, I just gave you a really simple model here to estimate what a hypothetical restaurant might look like, okay? And then I just fed it into this line. This could, all here highlighting what I just highlighted here, this could be any business that you model for yourself. And if you're starting a new business, going into a venture with some business owners, if none of your co-founders, if nobody knows how to make a simple pro forma for the business, especially a traditional business that you're getting into, you're not ready to start the business. That's, this is my opinion. You need to be able to understand the economics of your business, of the business that you're about to invest time and money to go into. So be able to generate something that is more complicated, more sophisticated, more detailed than what I've done here. That's just for demonstration purposes. So when you're able to do that, feed that line of the cash flow into row 26. And if you use this model, you can easily add more columns, okay? And if you're building out your model where it involves multiple worksheets, fine, it doesn't matter. Just feed it back into this row here to this worksheet, okay? Now, once you have that, once it feeds into this line, you can use any of the calculation sheets. They're pretty much all the same, except they're just preset to show you what it would look like if it were 2-tier, 3-tier, or 4-tier, okay? Or if there's no waterfall at all. So in this case, let's take a look at this. 3 co-founders. Let's say they all invest the same amount of the investment, 33.33%. Okay. And so they all have the same investment, and if there's no waterfall where Alice here, the main founder, is putting in more sweat equity than she's not putting in more sweat equity than others, everybody's getting the exact same return on their money, right? So that's the case for the no waterfall, and you see what that would look like based on the assumptions that are made for my hypothetical restaurant. It's pretty good return, 20% a year, and the cash multiple is 5.36. So it means for every dollar they put in, they can expect to get over $5 back over the course of the life of the project. Now, you can do the same here, and we can look at a 2-tier. Now, here you see the preferred return and the split. You can change that to whatever you like. Okay, this is a more risky venture. Maybe the preferred return is 12%. Okay. And instead of a 65-35 split, maybe it's 70-30. Alice isn't doing all that much, maybe. Or this is her first restaurant, and she's not that experienced, so she can't really negotiate terms that are in her favor as well. So she's only getting 70-30 split. And we'll see that all of these here, I've kind of defaulted to feed from the previous one, so you can see what it would look like, except we should change the preferred returns to be the same. And once you do that, you can get a better sense of how they compare if you go to the summary page. Now, we're not using the last 2 founders line, so that's why they have all these errors, because they didn't invest anything, so there's no calculations there. Right? We'll see here that in the 2, 3, and 4 tier, because this restaurant actually does really well and it's giving good returns, that you saw that in the no waterfall case, it's returning almost 20% to the investors. So if you provide any kind of waterfall with hurdles well below the 19.5% and with some kind of catch-up, Alice is going to do really well for her sweat equity. Okay, so this lecture here was just to show you that you can use this waterfall framework for pretty much for any type of business, as long as you're able to model out the pro forma for your business startup. Okay, now if you're looking at any kind of traditional business startup, you're going to be able to model out the cash flows for that business, and you'll be able to feed it in and then utilize this waterfall framework. Thanks.